Hey, welcome to the Independent Surfer Review, sponsored by Independent Surfer. We have a video from one of our clients and they send it over to us. And in this case, we're going to review their video so that you can see what's kind of going wrong, what's kind of going right, and how this specific person can get better at their surfing, and you can apply these same principles to your surfing, hopefully. If you aren't sure of the principles that we're going over, leave us a comment in the comment section or check out our online course where you can get a better understanding of the principles that we're discussing. In this case, we have an intermediate surfer who sent us over the video, and they're basically surfing a wave pool and getting up and pumping down the line. And so what we'll do first is we'll go through the video like just a few times so that you can get a feel and so that I can get a feel for what they're doing. And then once we have a feel and we've seen what's going on, we can start to break down the video into different sections. So let's play the video a couple times then. Alright, I know this is getting monotonous. One more time, just so you can see what's happening before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. I often find that the more times you watch the video, the easier it is for you to actually have an understanding of what's happening and start to point out different parts or different mistakes and the right thing that's going on as well. The first thing that I want to pay attention to or focus on is, this takeoff. As this person is taking off, they're in this general area. But you can also see that right in front of them, they have a person sitting a little bit further down the way here. And that can make it quite difficult for you to then pop up or be focused on what you're supposed to be focused on while you have somebody potentially in your way. So it's really important to make sure that you focus on this person, but then not spend too much attention on them. The next thing that you should be doing instantly is making sure that your gaze while you're paddling into the wave is looking down the line to pick your point. So this is one of the most common mistakes that I see people doing when they're surfing, is they're not looking down the line as they're getting up on the wave. And that basically is, the best way I can describe this is, imagine you're playing catch with somebody and you were trying to catch the ball with them throwing it behind you or in your peripherals. It would be much easier for you to catch the ball if you were watching the ball the whole time. And it's the same principle while surfing. It'd be much easier for you to pick your point and go to that point if you're able to watch that section the whole time. And so I really encourage you, if you feel like you're looking down at the board when you're popping up or looking straight ahead of you when you're popping up, to try and keep your gaze to the top line of the wave. Not necessarily only down the line, but also to the top line of the wave so that you can, one, see what the wave is doing, and then two, you can also pick your point that you want to go to. Cool, so as we move on here, I'm not saying that necessarily that this specific person is not doing that. If we look here, you can see though that it's quite grainy, so it's very hard to see, but you can definitely see here in this case, their gaze is either looking down here or potentially looking straight or at that person that could be potentially in their way in this general area. And as I mentioned before, you want to just be careful of that you're not looking or that you are paying attention to the fact that they're there, but then automatically looking down the line in the direction you want to go so that you can pick your point and you're trying to pay attention to this top line of the wave so that you know what the wave is doing down the line. Cool, so as we move into the next situation here, so he manages to get up in good time. It's really important to make sure that you're standing up at the top of the wave, which he does in this case. But then the first thing that I would like to show, and again, you can see his gaze, of course, looking at this person right here, which is very difficult to keep your eyes off of this person who should not be in that position in this case. So if you're this kind of person that you find yourself maybe here, the best thing that you can do is to try and be out of this person's way as much as possible. But every situation is different and things happen. So but just make sure that you're out of that person's way so that you're not in the way of the person trying to surf the wave. So next here, the person surfing the wave has finally realized that they're able to go past the surfer, and so their gaze starts to focus more down the line. But one thing I really want to pay attention to here or focus on is this hand, this left arm coming across their body. Now, once you've brought this arm across your body, it becomes very hard to keep control over the surfboard. So in this case, you want to make sure that as you get up and rotate your shoulders down the line, that you are not bringing this arm all the way to this side of your rail or this side of your surfboard so that both the hands are over the same rail. You want to keep each hand over each rail in this case because that's going to help you keep balance. And if you over rotate, it's really easy to end up in this situation where you're leaning on the toes and leaning on the heels, and you're not getting any shoulder rotation in. So a lot of the time, most of the time, in fact, if not always, the board is going to follow your shoulder rotation. And if your shoulder rotation is static and over the same rail, then your board is just going to follow down the line and you're not rotating your shoulder to help the board translate that movement. Cool, so this setup position is going to kind of set you up for the whole wave. So if we continue to watch the wave here, we can see that the shoulder rotation is staying the same direction the whole time. Shoulders aren't rotating, as well as both knees are facing, well, kind of in opposite directions. And as you have these knees facing in the opposite directions, that locks your hips up. It makes it really hard for you to then rotate to change your line. You're kind of like then stuck in this position of having both knees facing the same direction. Although he does do a good job to get down the line very quickly in surfing, you know, no speed, no turns. So one of the biggest points of that is to try and speed generate. But in this case, being very bent in the hip section here, so you can see how bent he is in the hip and back, which is not necessarily too much of a bad thing, but this 90-degree angle in the both front and back knee puts you in a squatting position, which is not ideal. You want to be in a situation where you have the back knee slightly inverted to keep the hips nice and open. So as we continue here, it's managing to pump down the line, rotating the board slightly up and down the wave, and then from the bottom here, going from a nice little bottom turn to top turn to finishing off the wave, which is a fairly decent turn at the end of the wave. Now, in this case, what tends to happen to us as surfers is we end up surfing a wave very laterally. And as I was saying before, you know, no speed, no turns. In such a small wave, it's very difficult to gain any speed because, you know, you have to generate all the speed because the wave is not giving you a lot of speed. And so, of course, you know, in his initial takeoff, he needed to get down the line because there was a person in his way in the beginning. But after that, you know, as he's moving down the line, he is ending up quite static in his knee movement. So if we play it one more time, you can see how he is extending and compressing slightly, but there's not much movement in the knees. And he's mostly compressed the whole time. So being locked in that hip position and locked in the knee position. And you really just want to have a little bit more movement with the arms and the knees, slight more compression and extension. Oftentimes when we're doing this, we need to exaggerate this a lot more because it will, like, you'll think that you're doing it very exaggeratedly or very exaggerated, but a lot of the time it's in our mind we think we're exaggerating the movement, but we're actually not. And so that's going to slow us down in the long run. So ideally, you know, coming out of this squatting position to have slight more of a corkscrew movement as you're extending and rotating to just help the board, you know, propel forward off of the fins. Also unweighting the body and the arms a bit more, using that momentum to help yourself unweight to create less resistance as you're extending up towards the top of the wave and then, you know, rotating back down to help the board go back down towards the top of the wave. You can also see that as he's extending out towards the shoulder, you know, now he gets to a point where he's quite far ahead of the pocket, and ideally you don't want to be surfing too far ahead of the pocket because in that case, you know, you're going to lose a lot of speed. And so, you know, it's just like your speed generation is just a means to an end. Like you're just trying to get to the end of the wave. So my advice for this, in this case, is to try and get 2 pumps in and then commit to a turn and then get 2 pumps in. A lot of the time, us as surfers, we try and surf, as I mentioned before, try and surf the wave to the end. But then that leaves us running away from the pocket of the wave, and then also leaves us playing it safe all the time. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. So it's really important to make mistakes, especially if you're going to get footage, so that you can kind of review that footage and then get better. But it's really hard because we all want to surf really well, and we want to, you know, we want to complete the wave because to our peers that looks great. But in this case, I would just say that, you know, pumping down the line is a good movement, but you don't want to pump all the way to the end of the wave unless you're going to use that speed to do quite a big maneuver. And you know, I'm guilty of this. We're all guilty of pumping ahead of the section. So then as we come to the end, it's kind of the same movement all the way along, and then going up from the bottom to the top of the wave. Now, I just want to highlight that this is a very small wave and it's quite hard to gain any sort of speed and momentum as you're getting down the line. And so, you know, no speed, no turns. So the turn that he did make in this instance, he did a fairly good job considering the fact that the wave was so small and quite hard to surf. If I go back here, one of the most important things that I would like to highlight in terms of speed generation is this left arm. This left arm over here coming up and dropping down as you're trying to speed generate down the line. And it's this extension, so in this case it'll be the left arm, it's throwing that left arm up and then dropping down. That's going to help you unweight yourself to limit the amount of resistance that you're creating on the board in the water, and it's also going to help the fins propel you forward. And in this case, you know, for me, this movement is a little like, you know, it's the way the arm is moving is kind of almost in the, it's not extending forward and up, pointing to the direction that he more or less wants to go. It's over the one rail and kind of, how could I say, it's moving independently of the body. You want this extension to all happen at the same time, and that unweighting of the body is going to help the board, you know, propel yourself and unweight yourself going from the bottom to the top of the wave. In this case as well, for me, you know, a lot of the time the board is sitting quite flat on the water, and that creates a lot of resistance. So you can imagine that as you put a board on rail, it allows the board to be, most of the board to be out of the water. And basically what that does is limits the amount of board that's in contact with the surface of the water. That can actually help you generate speed because you're not creating resistance with the rest of the board. And so, you know, you want to be able to commit to a rail more regularly so that you're staying on the rail and you're not surfing the board flat in the water. I like the body structure as he comes to do the bottom turn here. It's much better, but again, a lot of bending in the hips and not enough bending in the knees. And so you'll notice here where we are right now, again, you can see that he is bent in this hip area, has a very big arch in the back, and isn't dropping this knee to face in the same direction as the other knee. And so he's locking his hips up by both bending in the hips and squatting in the knee, instead of, you know, rotating the hips to be 45 and his knee to drop and, you know, bend in that way rather than bending in the hips and compressing yourself so that you can't rotate your upper body. Also, you know, again, as I was talking about bringing this left arm over, in this case, he has this left arm already over this rail of the surfboard. And so there's no momentum. He isn't able to then, and his shoulders are already pointing in the direction, you know, more or less of where he wants to go. There's no wind up to then create the momentum with the shoulders and this leading arm, basically. And so when he does his bottom turn, he's already like, his upper body is already way too far ahead. Essentially what you need to do is have this arm this leading arm over here on this rail, and then basically what that arm does is then it winds up and kind of like throws it towards that direction to help him create momentum. And it's almost like a throw in that direction and up. And you want to avoid having this hand coming across the nose of your board too regularly, just to keep control and always be in your set position. You don't want to be too far across the nose of your board. So that's pretty much it for that. If we continue here, so you can see now he's like kind of not carried too much momentum across up towards the top of the wave, and so the turn is quite, you know, lacking a lot of speed. But, you know, considering that he's still doing a relatively good job, because this wave is tiny, ankle biter as they would call it. You know, I wouldn't even consider this wave like knee high, and I would be quite disappointed with the waves being this size. But you take what you can get, and you did a good job to work with what was provided to him. The last thing I would like to add is that as you're going for your bottom turn, it's not only that this hand needs to come across and up towards the top of the wave, but it's also that this hand needs to open up the shoulders and slightly wind back this direction, almost behind him, so that he can help create the momentum, as well as open this shoulder to be able to then wind up and throw it back down when he's doing his top turn. In this case, there is no wind up, and he's unable to then do a relatively big top turn, although he's already lacking the speed. It's just that, you know, the top turn, there's no wind up. And then as he's going to do the turn, you know, this arm is then going backwards in this direction, because he is so side on to the rail of his surfboard. So you want your shoulders to generally be pointing at a 45-degree angle as much as possible to the board, unless you're obviously rotating. But seldom do you want to end up in this position where your shoulders, doing a top turn, where your shoulders are facing at a 90-degree angle to the board. And because this arm is going back in that direction, this arm is coming forward and counterweighting so that he doesn't fall backwards, and then it's kind of like destroying the momentum. You know, again, he wants to bring this arm forward in this direction and slightly bring that arm back in that direction, so that he's able to then, you know, follow through the turn, essentially. But nevertheless, fairly decent turn. He's at least looking in that direction, so that, you know, he's looking down towards the wave. It's just that in this case, you know, he wants his shoulders to also end up facing in that direction. And now they're facing towards us, towards the camera, which is perfectly fine if you're going for a big snap and you want to continue your direction down the line. But in this case, you want to, you know, you're at the end of the wave, you might as well commit fully to that turn. So that's pretty much it for this wave. I would say some key things to focus on is, number one, having really good speed generation technique will help you obviously carry speed between each turn. In this case, it was very difficult for him to drop down the wave and to do a nice bottom turn into a good turn. But as he's done his last speed generation situation here, I would say that it would have been better for him to cut back to the white water, that direction, to then turn and use this power part of the wave to then come down and get in the next turn. Because he's pumped away from the section, he's not carrying a lot of speed. And so it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like sometimes, you know, you should pump ahead to gain speed, but sometimes it's actually more beneficial for you to stay closer to the section rather than pumping ahead to gain speed. So that's pretty much it for this video. It's a lot to take in, and as I mentioned before, if you're not completely aware of the concepts that we're talking about, jump on a coaching call with us, or you know, send us a video for us to review for you, or take an online course, and you'll have a better understanding of what we're talking about so that you can get better at surfing. And we'll see you next time.